So you find yourself in that dreaded situation where you maybe bet twice. It's now the river and you're out of position. Can you check call? Or maybe you should bet small fold. Should you block bet? Or should you just check fold in this spot? So really it comes down to just having a premeditated plan for how to handle this situation. And there's a few various factors that come into play, and I'll cover that in this video in these 3 simple tips. The first thing you need to understand is how to read a board texture. Is it a dry board, is it a standard board, or is it a wet board? Drier boards tend to have fewer hands in our opponent's range that can connect to it. So when they are calling, generally they're not always going to have air. They're usually going to have some type of showdown value or medium strength or even strong hand when they're continuing on those type of boards. So if you get a dry flop and an opponent calls, then they call again. Well, generally, you should just be bet folding small on rivers on dry boards that have dry runouts like that. Because if they had a hand that was a little bit stronger than your medium strength top pair or your overpair or whatever, they probably would have raised by the river. There's not going to be that many draws in the range, so you've already gotten a couple streets of value, so you just need to maybe make a bet sizing commensurate with what you expect their range to look like on the river. If you expect them to have a lot of top pairs or maybe even a weak overpair, then maybe you bet a little bit bigger. If you expect them just to have like under pairs, second pairs, that type of thing, then maybe you want to size your bet down a little smaller. If you're just not sure at all, just bet a standard half pot or something like that. But it is always going to be generally a bet fold on that type of board, just because there's really not that many hands that were draws that they're now going to turn into a bluff on the river. So when I do talk about setting up a situation on the river for a potential bluff catch, what we're really talking about is a wet board. And whether we do that bluff catch on the river all depends on the exact run out that comes. So let's say it's a fairly wet flop. There's maybe flush draws, straight draws. It's a pretty connected board. So when we get calls on that flop after value betting with say a top mid or overpair or something like that, we can expect our opponent's range to have more than just pairs. We can expect them to have a lot of draws as well. So oftentimes the majority of the hand combos in their range will be drawing hands, just because there's more combos of that typically than there are of top pairs. So what we need to think about is how is that range that they have going to look when the river comes. So we bet the flop and say the turn is a blank. We bet the turn for value and now the river comes down. Now that card on the river is the main determining factor on how we are going to play our hand. Let's just assume that our range is still medium strength, or maybe even a little bit on the strong side. Say maybe we could even have an overpair in this spot. But we also understand that our opponent's range is mostly going to be polarized. They're probably going to have a hand that either can't call 3 streets or would only be able to call 3 streets with a very small bet. But we also know, based on what we knew on the flop, that the vast majority of their range is going to be something that is like a busted draw on a dry river. So if we get a very dry river, that is the situation that we're looking to do a bluff catch on with our marginal made or showdown value hands. Sometimes this could even be ace high if it's the correct run out. But most of the time it's going to be at least like a second pair, top pairs, and rarely third pair or like an ace high or king high. What we're mainly focused on is those difficult situations when you have like a mid strength or even a weak overpair, if there is such a thing, or a top pair, top kicker type hands. Those are the ones that we can be uncomfortable on rivers on particular runouts. If it was a wet river, like the draws get there, the flushes get there, the obvious straight gets there, whatever, that is not a good situation to bluff catch, because now we know the vast majority of their range might have just gotten there. So we don't want to check and then be unsure when they bomb it exactly whether we can call it. It's just a very awkward spot and one that we can avoid. So what we want to do in those spots when it's a wet run out and some of the draws get there and we still have our top pair is go ahead and just do a bet fold. Maybe 40% pot, half pot, doesn't really matter. Whatever your process dictates would be a value bet in that situation. Sometimes it could be a strong mid pair, something like that. Whatever we bet, think we can get called by worse, we want to bet in that situation. Go for a bet fold line when it's a wet run out. Don't be afraid to value bet that top pair, top kicker, or whatever when it's a wet run out. If a flush comes in, there's still other hands in the range that you might be able to get value from. Now you might need to size your bets down a little bit to get value from those hands. So instead of betting your normal 2/3 pot, you might bet, like I said, 40% or even a third pot to try to get value or squeeze value and also make your river decision a little bit easier. Or if our hand is marginal, maybe we have a weaker mid pair, maybe we have like ace high that we thought we could improve, maybe we have a hand that maybe could have improved in that spot. We either need to turn the hand into a bluff, or if we have some marginal showdown value, we just want to check, and then maybe he'll check back and not bluff the river, because they're not necessarily always going to bluff these spots, right, opponents. But what we want to do is when it is a dry run out, we want to go ahead and check those spots, and then if we have a reasonably mid-strength or even sometimes a marginal made hand, when the vast majority of their range was a draw on the flop, it means the vast majority of their range on the river on a dry run out is still going to be air. So when we have third pair, second pair, and we check, when they bet, it's going to be a polarized spot. So when they bet whatever on the river, we can profitably check call because they're probably either going to have the nuts or nothing a lot of the times when they bet. So number 3, the last thing we need to talk about here is your opponent type. You don't want to be doing this check call stuff on the river against a complete nit. If you're facing a really passive player, it could be like even your 80-20 types, your 80-10 whales that are just never betting. Or it could just be your 16-14 passive reg type that just only bets when they have, and they're just not as capable of a bluff as a lot of other players. So you want to err on the side of having stronger hands if you actually do a check call like that, or you just want to do more of a blocking bet against these players, because generally these players aren't capable of raising your bluff anyway, so it just makes the hand play a lot easier to take more of a blocking bet line versus those players. However, against standard players and especially against aggressive players, these are the ones that we want to be targeting mostly for a bluff catch. And if it's an extremely aggressive opponent, then we can even widen our check calling range in this spot to a lot more marginal hands, because they'll also have a lot of floats in their range. So if you get to a spot where you're deciding whether to check call or bet fold or just check fold, just look at the aggression if you have that read on your opponent. And if you're on the fence, check call the aggressive opponent or standard opponent, and tend to check fold or bet fold the more passive opponent. So why can we profitably check call these spots on dry runouts? Well, everybody's watched the World Series of Poker. I heard these poker announcers always say, well, he has a marginal hand and he missed his draws. The only way he's going to win here is if he bets. So people, when they get to rivers and they have busted draws and it checks to them, they understand from listening to and watching these people and hearing this over the years that they need to bet in this spot. So people are going to be over bluffing in these spots a lot and just paying off a lot more marginal hands. So when somebody's polarized and they're either nuts or nothing, those are the spots we're looking for where we can bluff catch. But we can intentionally create these spots. So when I'm on the flop and I have a medium strength hand or strong hand, I am immediately thinking, what's my hand going to look like on the river? If it's a dry flop, I might be going for my normal 2 streets of value, but I might delay getting my value and not even have to worry about this type of spot. I might check call, whatever. I might play a little bit more passively if my hand isn't so vulnerable. Generally, when you have high vulnerability on the flop and it's a wet, draw-heavy board, that's when you want to be thinking about, okay, this is a bluff catch spot on the river for me a lot of the time. So I'm going to take the line that best sets me up to be in that spot. So it's a wet board and I get a dry run out. I'm thinking more, this is my spot that I should be looking to make a bluff catcher. So in summary, you need to understand what a board texture looks like. You want to mostly be doing this on wet boards that have a dry run out. If it's a wet run out, you generally want to go for more of a bet fold or a check fold type of line. you need to understand your range. You need to make sure you're still bet folding hands that can get value from worse. You don't just want to automatically bluff catch on the river just because it's a bloated pot. If you can get value, go ahead and bet and get value. It's those hands that you think you cannot get value from worse that we need to be thinking about bluff catching. And last, you need to understand your opponent. You don't want to be doing this against the nittiest players. Against standard or aggressive players, you tend to want to save this line for them. If you're against a passive player, just play straightforward. They're going to tell you when they're strong. So it's much better to take smaller bets in general and just bet them into oblivion when they have worse hands that can call. Otherwise, on rivers, you should just be check folding regardless of the runout because they're going to be overbalanced towards having strong hands when they bet. Whereas standard players or aggressive players in this spot will be overbalanced in general toward air because they had air on the flop and they're aggressive on the river. They're going to have air show up with air a lot more, at least high enough frequency to make a check call profitable for you. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope it helps you kind of eliminate the dread of this situation, which is pretty common. I used to hate this spot until I figured out exactly when I could check call or when I should be bet folding. So if you have any other ideas in regards to this, or maybe you disagree, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and we can have a discussion about how to better tackle this situation when you need to think about potentially bluff catching. Or if you have any questions in general, I'd love to hear from you as well. Thanks for watching and have a good day.